The West to the Rest era of missions is over. Right now, around the world, especially in Latin America, Asia, and Africa, the global south of the church, there are multiple centers for missions. And so missions today is not just coming from the West, it is coming from all over the global south. That has implications in everything that we do for the church and for the church today. That has implications as well for theological education today. And in this video, we're going to be looking at what is the implication of having these multiple centers for missions today for theological education. In prior videos, we've looked at things like the growth of the church in the global south, the need for pastoral leaders. We've looked at the need for recalibrating, rethinking how we focus in. What is the course? What is the purpose of theological education? We've thought about how do we begin to cross the sectors of training, the formal, non-formal, informal. How do we all work together more? But for this video, for us here today, I want us to focus in on understanding what is it that's happening around the world in missions and how that affects what we do and what we think about and how we practice theological education today. The West of the era was a strong and even dominant era for missions. And it worked in many different disciplines. It could be Bible translation, church planning, and so on and so forth. But it certainly had its implications for theological education. Even today, as I travel and I visit schools and school leaders in all of the different regions, especially Africa, Latin America, and in Asia, you still find programs, books, curricular courses, literature, teaching styles, teaching methods that look exactly what we do in the West. And so for a long period of time, as we lived under this West to the Rest era of missions, theological education in those parts of the world was framed by the theological education that we had here, especially in the U.S. and in Europe. But there's a new era that we see upon us. It is no longer, as I said earlier, it is no longer the West to the Rest era of missions. Today we have Latin America sending missionaries. I know these people. I've seen them. I've been with them. We have Latin America sending missionaries to China, to Afghanistan, to Turkey, to Europe. And that's just from Latin America. From Asia, we know there are Asians all over the world. The global diaspora of the Asian community is vast and extends everywhere around the world. And they are indeed focused on how is it that the Lord might lead us into different lands, different parts of the world, and evangelize, lead churches, start churches. That's missions, friends. And in Africa, here's what my African friends tell me. They tell me Africa is no longer a mission field. Africa is a mission force. And I see it with the different countries, Ethiopia especially. If you look at what's happening in Ethiopia and the number of missionaries that they're sending all over the world. I've spoken to people in Europe that come from Africa, and they are intentionally there to lead churches, to start churches, to lead and be in theological education as well. This whole concept, this is important for us to understand, this whole concept of moving from the West to the Rest era of missions is sometimes termed polycentric missiology. Now, I know that's a big word. Those are a couple of big words there. But they are important for us to understand because poly, of course, means many, and centric means centers. So we are putting language to what is already happening. And back in 2016, the World Evangelical Alliance, you've heard me mention the World Evangelical Alliance previously. The WA has had a conference in Panama in 2016. And when they gathered in Panama, the topic was polycentric missiology. And that was led by the Mission Commission of the WEA. And ever since then, especially, we have seen literature and publications, all sorts of things talking about this topic. But in essence, what it really means, and for us to understand, is that it's affirming, it's putting language to understanding that the period of time that we talked about earlier, the West to the Rest era of missions, that we have moved into a different era where there's not just one center, but there are many, many centers. Polycentric missiology also has multiple core values, but there's two that I want to highlight for us in this video today. One is part of what they hope to accomplish, that are talking about and discussing and reflecting on this more polycentric view of missions, multiple centers, not just the West any longer. Those are involved in this. For the most part, they're looking at this as a way to re-evangelize the West. This is a remarkable development if you think about it. They are intentionally thinking about how is it that in Europe and in the U.S., North America, and other parts, Australia, so how is it that we can begin to move into those areas, into those parts of the world? Are those areas becoming our mission field? And that just is a remarkable reversal of what's happening in the world. Previously, I had mentioned that GACX, the Global Alliance of Church Multiplication, indicated that we now have 70% of the churches in the world in the global south, Africa, Asia, and Latin America. That's a remarkable statistic. 70% of the churches are in the global south. And of course, then they are developing and growing and becoming stronger as they go on, many new believers, but they're also very missions-minded. They understand the Missio Dei. They are looking at ways where they can move to different parts of the world and to evangelize and to lead and start new churches. The other aspect of polycentric missiology is this core value of collaboration, or actually mutuality in collaboration. It's very specific. It is not just we're going to collaborate for the sake of maybe trying to do something together. No, it's a little bit more than that. It's about how is it that we can work together, collaborate, so that what you're doing in your work, in your mission, and in your ministries, how is that we can work together so that what you're doing can accelerate, can gain greater capacity, but at the same time, it also somehow helps me to develop and get stronger as well. There's this sense of mutuality that's part of polycentric missiology today. Let me just share with you some theological education implications to all of this. Let me give you an example. I was in Spain a few years back in Barcelona, and I was visiting a seminary there, a well-established, long-lasting seminary there in Barcelona. And the principal, the president, is taking me around and showing me the campus, and he brings me into this one section of the campus, and it has Chinese professors and students, and they are studying theology and Bible in Chinese at a seminary in Spain. That is polycentric type of the diaspora, the movement of people, the development of different areas of Christianity and ministries. That is happening in Spain right now. We also have things like Africa, missionaries being sent to become scholars and leaders in Europe and other parts of the world. This is what's happening, and these are some of the implications of what I want us to understand, that this whole movement from a West to the Rest era to a multiple-centered missions global movement is not only having implications for things like Bible translation and church planning and so on, it's having implications for theological education, how we think about it and how we do it today. I've mentioned previously the I Set Manifesto document published in 2022. And again, this was a document that took over 2 years to put together. Leaders from all parts of the world came together. They wanted to make a global declaration about theological education. And as they did so, they included this statement. Let me read it to you. It says, "In an increasingly globalized and polycentric world," they're so spot on right there, just looking at that. In an increasingly globalized and polycentric world, partnerships in theological education will become more and more important and significant. Consequently, we are committed to the development of partnerships in theological education, which are shaped by mutual respect and interdependence. We want to overcome, listen to this, we want to overcome all forms of unhealthy dependence and neocolonialism. You see, that west to the rest era shaped theological education in the global South all across the board, both at the formal and even the non-formal sectors of training. And I mentioned that previously in this video. But this statement is going right after it, isn't it? It's telling us, it's helping us to realize that if we're going to move together in a world that is globalized and polycentric, then we need to have relationships. We need to have mutuality. We need to have collaboration that is not based upon unhealthy dependence. And that's a challenge today, because as we look at theological education in the global South, it is still sometimes too dependent on what's happening in the West, not only from a financial standpoint, but from a scholarship standpoint. And in other videos, we will address this topic more specifically about how is it that we can develop healthy dependence as opposed to unhealthy dependence. How is it that we can develop good, sound theological education and literature and other resources in the global South in the months and years to come? And this word of collaboration is a very important word nowadays. It's an important global buzzword, even as I use it nowadays and I see how others are using it. It is used everywhere that I go. Everyone wants to talk about collaboration. It's important, but it's important that we have healthy collaboration and not overly dependent on another. I spoke earlier about the idea of flattening. How is it that the different sectors of theological education can flatten a little bit and become more collegial in their work? That's part of what we're talking about here with collaboration and movement towards a polycentric view of theological education. There are multiple opportunities for us to be thinking about. One of the areas I want to mention briefly, and again, in other videos, we will address this more specifically, but I want us to also understand that this polycentric movement from the West to the rest era, a time in missions, but also in theological education, has led us to think about more indigenous, localized development of programs. And this is an important global trend that we see in all parts of the global South, where people in those areas want to be more involved in the development of the programs and the courses, rather than simply having them imported from the West. That is becoming a significant part of missions across other areas of missions, but also in theological education today as well. So I want us to be aware of some of these implications for us in theological education, how we think about it, even some of us that might be in the West, but also those that are in the global South, the advances and the things that are happening because of this movement. We are in a post-West to the rest era for missions, and it has been framed as polycentric missiology, and that word itself is also now being reconfigured and rethought of and so on. But for us, for our purposes, what I want us to realize is that there's been this, I use the word maturing. There's this maturing taking place in the global South and in theological education, in Bible translation, and church planting, and all sorts of missions activity. There's this maturing that's taking place in the global South, and more localized development of resources and thinking about evangelicalism and what is it, what does it mean, and so on and so forth. These are all things that are happening now in the global South, and we need to be aware of what's happening. Those of us from the West need to be really in tune on this. This is significant for us, not only as we think about missions, but as we think about theological education. And those that are in the global South, how do we continue to help that maturing process without interfering in it, without having us become too dependent on us? And this is happening across the sectors, no matter what sector we're in. Those of you that are in the West, you're involved in a training program, could be non-formal. You're involved in an institution, a Bible college, seminary. You have opportunities to be engaged, and I'm asking you to become more engaged with what's happening with your colleagues around the world. I said can help with some of that, but there are other ways of doing that too. How can you become more engaged in what's happening in Africa in the schools there, or in Latin America, Asia? The scholarship that's coming out of Asia is absolutely phenomenal nowadays. So those that are leading programs in the West, can you become more aware of what's happening in those parts of the world? And how might that shape how you are developing your own programs? Because I promise you, you will learn and you will grow yourselves. And those of you that are in the global South, we want to make sure we globally, it is of significant importance nowadays for us to have this collegial, this outward posture, this position of how is it that we can work together. And those of you that are in the global South and in those parts of the world, how is it that we can all work together and further strengthen what you're already doing without replacing it, right? Folks, this is an important topic, and it's one that's going to continue to develop. And as we see it developing, I trust that you will continue to join us as we rethink theological education together.